Hi everyone, it is April from Getting Hogo With It. Today I want to share with you my top 10 nonfiction reads, so let's get into it. So Nonfiction November is just around the corner. I hope that you guys are going to be participating in it. I have a few nonfiction books that I have on the brain, that's for sure. But I did want to share with you my top 10 nonfiction favorites. These are books that have, some of them stood the test of time. Some of them I have read more recently and just loved them. And I needed to share the goods with you. So let's dive in. This is in no order. Like, I don't have like a number one favorite nonfiction book. They're just the 10 best in my mind. They're the best. First, let's talk about a book that blew my mind this year in a big way, and that was Hood Feminism by Mickey Kendall. If you read no other book on this list, I would so highly recommend reading this, especially if you consider yourself feminist, especially if you're a white feminist, because this is about how feminism is leaving Black women behind. This explores how things you might not have considered feminist issues, like hunger, like gun laws, these things are actually feminist issues, and I had not considered them feminist issues before I read this book. It really opened my eyes. I ended up highlighting my way through it, which I know many of you are going, no, don't do that, you're ruining it. But sometimes when you read a book and you want to remember certain things that have like really impacted you, you gotta highlight. At least I do. I absolutely adored this book, and I think it's probably one of the most influential books I've read this year. I hope that this will make me a better feminist, and I hope after you read this, it might make you a better feminist too. Next up is The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. This is a memoir, essentially, about her childhood growing up with two very eccentric parents. Her mom was an artist. Her dad was like a businessman. He like a would-be businessman, but a terrible businessman. And they had a very tumultuous childhood. They moved around a lot. They were not always able to find their next meal. There are, scenes in here of them, the kids digging through the trash to get anything to eat. They just had a really hard childhood. At the same time, they were loved. Their parents did love them, but they were very irresponsible parents. The parents really, really did need to reach out and get more help to raise these children, because they didn't do the best job at all. Like, they didn't. And we follow Jeanette Walls throughout her childhood, but we meet her when she's an adult and she's driving, I think, through New York, and she looks out and she sees her parents digging through trash. They are homeless. They've chosen to be homeless, it seems. And it's about her relationship with her parents. It's a hard read. It's infuriating at times. But I also just fell completely in love with Jeanette Walls reading this. Next is Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Lori Gottlieb. This really surprised me in a wonderful way this year. This is about a therapist named Lori Gottlieb who goes to therapy. So she is in a relationship with a man. She has a child from before meeting this boyfriend of hers. And her boyfriend decides one day that he doesn't want kids, like including her kid, even though she came into the relationship with a kid. And so she has a lot of anger and confusion and sadness to work through with her therapist. And you sit with her on the couch as she deals with her therapist, who I really liked. And then you also sit with her on the couch as she is helping her patients in therapy, and you meet all sorts of patients of hers and their issues. And I just loved this book so much. There are lots of little nuggets of wisdom through this, and I'd actually really love to read this again because I learned so much. And yeah, I just loved this. And this was sent to me by Dawn, one of my subscribers. Thank you again, Dawn, because as you can see, it is now like one of my favorite books of all time. So loved. Maybe you should talk to someone. Next, I would recommend The Five. This is about Jack the Ripper, but not really. It is a true crime book about the women that Jack the Ripper killed, because I don't know about you, but all I knew about the Jack the Ripper victims were that they were all prostitutes. Well, actually not really. Not really at all. They were poor women, yes, a lot of the time, down on their luck. Many of them had very difficult lives. This is such an interesting glimpse into, I think, Victorian London and how horrible it would be living at that time as a woman in particular. Really not easy at all. And you grow to care about all of these women, and somehow while you're reading this, you're hoping the whole way through that they'll somehow escape their destiny, even though you know they will be murdered by Jack the Ripper. You know that's gonna happen. That's the whole point of the book. But you end up caring for them that much. And sometimes you want to shake them a little bit too because they're making bad decisions. But it depends on the woman. I loved that book. It was really, really fascinating. Another book that I adored so much this year was The Splendid and the Vile by Erik Larson. This is a saga of Churchill, family, and defiance during the Blitz. This is really about the London Blitz, and it is about how Churchill managed his time, managed the public's morale, during World War II, while London was being just braided by bombs, and just being obliterated. And it was about, honestly, you got to give a hand, and you got to tip your hat to the English people. They were so steadfast through it. They'd be bombed one night and then go about their business the next day, obviously take care of each other, but they were so resilient. I found it really fascinating. And this also really explores a lot of Winston Churchill's quirks. He was a very quirky man, a very vibrant and passionate man, but also really quirky, and I found him to be kind of funny at times. I just loved this book so much, and I also adore this cover. So pretty. Next is a book that I read when Nora was first born. This is Dear Ijawele, or A Feminist Manifesto in 15 Suggestions. I adore Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. It's a very tiny, tiny book, like tiny. You can read this in one sitting. And this book came about because Chimamanda's friend was having a baby girl, and she said, how, Chimamanda, should I raise a feminist? And she sat down and thought about it and wrote her friend a letter. And this is that letter kind of beefed up. And it is wonderful. And it's things like, teach your girl to read. Don't encourage her to focus on being likable. All of these little suggestions that I want to read this every year to remind myself how to be a feminist for myself, but also how to raise Nora to be strong and, walk through this world that is, still very patriarchal. So I loved this so much, and I'll go back to it again and again and again. Now, this is an old book that I read many moons ago, but I adored so much and appreciated so much. And this is Wild Swans, The Daughters of China. And in this book, you follow 3 generations of women who basically go through the Mao regime. Now, before I read this, I knew nothing about Mao. I knew nothing about the regime. I knew nothing about China's history. And this helped me learn about the history of China, but through these women that you end up really, really caring about. It is brutal at times what the Chinese people went through and had to go through during this time was sometimes incredibly devastating and incredibly difficult. And I just appreciated it so much. I just recommend this one to absolutely anyone interested in China and Chinese history. Very interesting. Oh, another book that I loved. Oh my God. Obviously, I loved all of these books because they're like my top 10 nonfiction. But I Am by Maggie O'Farrell was so fascinating. It's a memoir of her, is it 17 brushes with death that Maggie O'Farrell actually experienced. Now, Maggie O'Farrell is a fiction writer. She wrote Hamnet, which recently won the Booker, I believe, or the Women's Prize. The Women's Prize, that's what it won, which was fantastic. But she wrote this book as a memoir, and you would not believe how many times she nearly died. She was actually nearly murdered. What? This also explores a miscarriage that she had and the feelings that she had while going through that. And I think that chapter in and of itself, it meant so much to me because I'd gone through a miscarriage, and some of the thoughts that I had were so bad and sometimes hateful that I was actually like questioning like who I was as a person. And it made me feel a lot better. It made me feel like, okay, this is not completely crazy. Other women who've had this experience have also thought some of these things. So I adored that book so much, and you would not believe the life that that woman has had. So good. Okay, 2 more books. Another true crime book that actually terrified me, like truly terrified me, is I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara. This is one woman's obsessive search for the Golden State Killer. This became a miniseries on HBO. Now, Michelle McNamara had a blog, and she, on this blog, was very fascinated by the Golden State Killer and was trying to solve the crimes and was trying to find this man who raped women and murdered men and women for years through I think the 70s and a little bit of the 80s. And then all of a sudden it stopped. And she was on the hunt for him. She sadly died before she finished writing this book. After this was published, about maybe a month or 2 after it was published, the Golden State Killer was found and is in jail now. But I read this just when it was released, and so he wasn't found yet. I think I finished this, and then a week later he was found, and I remember being so shocked. But this is terrifying because it is about this killer who would break into people's homes in the middle of the night, shine a light in their face, and basically tell them he was going to murder them if they didn't comply, and he'd like tie them up and then go about and eat things from their fridge and like would stay a very long time after victimizing these people. And sometimes he'd kill them too. And it was just terrifying to me. Truly scary, but so well written. I thought it was great. Okay. And last but not least is Educated by Tara Westover. Now this has a very similar vibe to me as The Glass Castle. I think I prefer The Glass Castle over Educated, but they're both very good. This is about a young girl named Tara Westover. She is now in her 30s. She's a little younger than I am. And she had a really rough childhood where her family didn't believe in the education system, but they also didn't believe really in homeschooling either. Like, if you could read, that was good enough. They didn't believe in the healthcare system, and there would be scenes in here where like people would be like gravely ill, like in a car crash with a concussion. They wouldn't go to the hospital for days and days and days. Like, probably not a good idea. She also had an abusive father and an incredibly abusive brother. And I'd never read anything about sibling abuse before this, and it explored it so well. Her brother is probably one of my most hated. He's not even a character. He's a real living human being. I just hated him. There is like a happy ending, because you know right from the get-go that she did become very educated. She went to like, I think like Harvard and Cambridge. I mean, that's very impressive. And she's a very resilient young woman, and I'm looking forward to seeing what she comes out with next. So those are all of the nonfiction books that I would recommend to you if you're looking to pick up something for Nonfiction November, and you haven't read some of these or any of these. I mean, this is an amazing little pile to go through, and I think you'd be guaranteed a pretty darn good read. So I hope that you guys are doing well. Let me know in the comments below what your favorite nonfiction book is. I would love to know what that is. And I will talk with you soon. Bye, everyone.